Hello friends, this is Pratik. Today we'll be discussing how to deploy a React app at GitHub Pages using GitHub Workflows. I deployed my React app at GitHub Pages. So at the end of the video, your website will look like this, and this is the deployment link. So now let's get started. For deploying your React app, there are tons of different ways you can use, but today I will be specifically discussing the GitHub Workflow way. GitHub workflows are very important, so that's why I thought of discussing this way of deployment. For creating GitHub workflow, you have to create a folder named .github, and inside that folder, you have to create another folder workflows. This folder will contains all the workflows for your repo. If you don't know what the workflow is just an automated process that will run at a GitHub when something special event occurs. We will be later discussing what that event is. So you have to specify the workflow file name here. All the workflow files at GitHub are in YAML format. Don't worry if you don't know the YAML format. I will be discussing in this video. You can specify any name here or .yaml. So the workflow file will start with the name. This is the name of your workflow. Like I want this workflow to have name build and deploy, which gives pretty much good intuition that this workflow will build my repo and deploy it. Second is on argument. You can specify the GitHub events here. Specify on which event this workflow will occur, will start. So I mentioned here workflow dispatch. It means this workflow is run manually. I can go to GitHub and run this workflow, and the changes in my repo will get pushed to deployment. But if you want this workflow to run when any new commit is pushed to, like say any specific branches, say main or dev, or you can specify more branches here. If you specify this, then this workflow will fire when something new commit is pushed to main branch, and it gets automatically fired. But when you specify workflow dispatch, you have to manually run the workflow from GitHub. So now for current timing, I want this workflow to run manually, so I mentioned here workflow dispatch. Now you have to specify the jobs. Jobs are the tasks that this workflow will perform. A single workflow can perform multiple tasks. So this starts with the task name. You can specify any task name here, but make sure the task name is intuitive. So I mentioned here build and deploy. So my first job is to build and deploy the repo. Inside this is a single task that this workflow will perform. You can specify a more task here if you want to perform. So inside this task, I want to specify some configurations. You can specify different configurations for OS and the environment you want in which your workflow will run. Like I want this workflow to run in Ubuntu latest operating system. You can specify also here Windows, etc. Mac OS. Now we have to specify the steps that this task will perform. Make sure make sure you have proper indentation because in YAML file indentation matters. So in steps you can specify the name of the step, like what this steps does, and second is uses, or you can specify here run. I will so uses. GitHub action uses pre-built. Okay, So let me explain it first. So you can specify the name here like checkout action and secondary actions name. So the name argument here is just optional. You can skip this argument and directly go with uses. Uses here takes an action. So as you can see, this is a GitHub workflow or action, but GitHub also has some pre-built GitHub action that you can use in your repo. So checkout is a pre-built action that GitHub provides. What this action does is it will allow this workflow to access the repository content. Because to deploy React app, we first have to build it, and to build it, we must have the access the code of the repo. So using this, you can access the content of the repo in its code. Second, as you know, to start or build a React app, we first have to install the dependencies and then we build the app. So installing dependencies with npm CI. npm CI is clean install. What it does is it is different from npm I. It first delete the node modules folder if it exists and then install the dependencies. And then we have to run npm run build. But to run two commands in the same step, we use a pipe operator. Using this operator, we can specify multiple commands here. Like this steps first, install the dependencies, and then we will build our React app. But you must thought of this of critical step that how this workflow will have Node.js installed. So when you are using any language in GitHub workflow, make sure you first specify in the workflow that we want to use this language. So we have to set up the environment. It's just a step name. So GitHub provides a built-in action that we can use to set up Node.js environment. Definitely you can Google the pre-built actions that GitHub provides. Like you can go here, github.com actions. Here you can see the pre-built actions GitHub provide like setup node, and there are a lot of actions that it provides. You can use in your repos. Now, now we have access to our repository code, set up the Node.js environment, install the dependencies, and build our app. Now we just left with our last task to deploy. For deploying our React app, we again use a GitHub action. You can search different GitHub actions in GitHub Marketplace. I am just showing so that you are aware of how to do this. Yeah. So this is the action GitHub pages deploy action that will be using. When you are using a new action, their documentation will help. What are the steps to use? So here it is mentioned that we just have to write James GitHub page deploy action version 4. With the with here specifies the argument this action takes. So it takes argument folder, the folder the action should deploy. So we can just copy this. Also, this action also takes another argument if you want to specify explicitly the branch to which your changes should be deployed. Like when after this all gets built, all that assets will go to GitHub Pages branch. So that's all. Now we have to push these changes to our GitHub repo. I have already pushed these changes to my GitHub repo. So directly moving in. So this is the workflow file we just created. This is just a little bit different from what we created here. Also, one more thing I want to mention that we can specify here the version of node we want to use. Like here as with here used to specify the arguments to this action. Setup node.js action also takes some arguments like the node version. The node version we want to use. I currently want to use node version 16. This here used to specify that it can be 16 point anything. Now you can push these changes to your GitHub repo and it will look like this. So now what you have to do is just go to actions, settings, in actions here in general. Actually this action writes the file to GitHub pages branch. So this action must have the right access to the repo. So please make sure in workflow permission you click the read and write permissions and hit save. Another thing you have to do is in your package.json you have to specify a home change field which will should look like this. You have to specify your GitHub username here, then .github.io, then here is your repository name. Like my repository name is repo app deploy demo. So I specified here repo app deploy demo. This is a very important step because your deploy React tab will make request to this URL for requesting the files from the server. Now after all this is set up, we just have to trigger the workflow. As the method here is workflow dispatch, we have to manually run the workflow from here. You can go to build and deploy. You can see this is the workflow name we chosen and then the branch you want. I want my changes to be deployed from main branch and hit run workflow. Now you can refresh the page and you can see that the jobs is started. We only have one job name build and deploy, so it is started here. If we have multiple jobs, it will start there. So this is the first action performed. Using this, it can access the repository content. This is our second action, setting up the Node.js environment. It is using Node version 16.20.1, and then it is installing the dependencies, install and build. You can see these are all the steps we mentioned here in our workflow. Checkout action, set up the node environment, and installing dependencies and build. Now, this workflow that successfully executed. Now you just have to do one step more for the first time. You have to come to settings, pages, deploy from branch, then choose your branch in the that you specified in the workflow. We specified here GitHub pages, so we will deploy from GitHub pages root and then hit save. And then it will take some time to show you this URL. This is the live URL of your website. More thing I want to show you is, if you came to GitHub pages branch, you can see here it contains the all the assets of build folder. Like build folder contains static folder, asset manifest.json and index.html, like here. So all the content of build folder is pushed to GitHub pages branch, and then we are deploying that branch from GitHub pages. Okay. Thanks. That's all.